Somos poderosas. We're powerful, but we're more powerful when we're together. So it was just that energy that keeps us going and keeps us motivated to just really be impactful and bring other Latinas along the way that we are, because I really believe the future is Latina.
Yep.
Unidas somos más.
Yes.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, la Doctora Janire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with the founders of El Puente Institute, who come to share their knowledge and tips on how we can leverage our Latinx culture to be better leaders in the corporate world. And they're here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Doctoras del Puente Institute, welcome to LatinX Can.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Gracias. Bienvenidas. Excited to be here.
Yeah, a room full of doctoras. Look at that.
Look at us. More doctoras.
You know, and I was telling you all this time, I didn't know where they were. We're all on the same platform today.
We aren't all out there. We might be a little bit like hiding, but we're all here for sure. And so shout outs to all the doctoras listening.
Absolutely. So today is going to be a little different because it's the four of us on the line. So we're going to try to manage the conversations as best we can. But we always start with the same questions, and it's to learn a little bit more about our guests. So let's start by telling me more about your story and where your story begins. And maybe we can start with Dr. Patty.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having us. We as Doctoras of El Puente Institute are super excited to be part of this podcast with yourself. And so my name is Dr. Patty Delgado. I am the CEO and founder of the Bridgify Group, which is a research firm that focuses on bridging research with practice. And El Puente Institute is a division of the Bridgify Group. And so we pride ourselves in everything that we do to be research-focused, evidence-based, and also have a little bit of flair and fun in everything we do. We're excited to be here. I am originally from El Paso, Texas. We're a very big border town here in the very tip of Texas. And I've always lived, born and raised here. And it is a community of predominantly Latinos. So we do understand what it feels like to be the majority. It's all about familia, comunidad, our heritage, the food. The people in El Paso are amazing. If you ever get an opportunity to visit the Sun City, we're called the Sun City because almost every day out of the whole year, it is sunny and beautiful. Please come and visit our wonderful community. And I was raised, in traditional Mexican-American family, did go to school outside of El Paso. And that was when I first realized that I was a student of color. So as I grew up, nobody talked about these topics of racism, discrimination, being minorities until I left and then was now put in that, given so nicely that label at my college, but was able to experience what it is to be a minority in the U.S. I'm also a military spouse, so did a lot of traveling around the U.S. and living in different places, had the opportunity to be part of very different communities. So I'm very proud of my background being a military spouse, a Latina, now a doctora, and now the privilege of working with these two amazing women as part of El Puente Institute. So that's a little bit about my story. I'm a mother. I have a 5-year-old daughter who is amazing. She's chiquita and picosa and all around. and just my identity is of many different layers. So that's a little bit about me. But thank you for letting me share my story.
No, amazing. When you talk about El Paso and growing up in the majority, that's pretty much how I grew up, right? I grew up in Venezuela and I saw myself represented everywhere. And then coming out of that and realizing that now you're in the minority is something different. Yeah. But the one thing that I really loved about growing up in Venezuela is that it gave me the best opportunity of my life, which is to be comfortable in my skin and to understand that I can achieve anything that I want and I put my effort towards. And so I think that's something that nobody can ever take away from me, having that confidence. So that's amazing. What about Dr. Alejandra?
Yes, of course. Well, first, thank you for having us here. And let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Alejandra Mielke. I am originally from Monterrey, Mexico. And 23 years ago, I decided to have that great idea of coming to get a PhD here at UT Austin. So I live in Austin, Texas. Like I said, I was in the field of education for a long time. I was a teacher. I began my professional career decades ago as a teacher. And then I was a school administrator. And then I came here and I found out the great need to understand and to serve properly the many Latinx students in the schools in Texas and around the nation. So I work a lot towards fighting different thinking views that are held about the Hispanic community. I worked very hard at UT. And then at some point, I decided to go and see what those kids that I visited, how they were doing now that they were knocking the doors of corporate America. So that's what I do. I do coaching, I do DI, and I'm always trying to open minds to people so people have that cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, cultural competence to understand different ways of being, doing, and living. And personally, I'm married to my husband who comes from a German descent, hence the Mielke. That's not my real name. And I have a boy, Santiago, who is 14, and he is, through a lot of work, he is 100% bilingual, bicultural, and actually he has 2 passports, the U.S. passport and the Mexican passport. So I have very intentional effort to develop in him that biculturality that I know can be such a great benefit for us. So I'm very happy to be here and continuing this effort.
Yeah. And Dr. Alejandra, we have had you on the podcast before. And so I will link the episode to our show notes so that people can know more about all the amazing things that we talked about when we first interviewed you. So Dr. Patricia, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yes. So I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia. I'm an immigrant. I came to the United States. I guess I'm somewhere between Patty and Alejandra. I came here about when I was starting high school. And so it was immigrating at that age into a small town in Oklahoma that was predominantly white. That was my first encounter in having to realize that I was a woman of color. I was a Latina. The time when I immigrated to the United States, they call us Hispanics. Mm-hmm. So I quickly had to learn how to navigate 2 cultures and being able to, when I immigrated to the United States, at a time where Latino immigration was lowered, especially in the part of Oklahoma that I was, just really having to quickly assimilate for survival of what it means to be, a Latina in the United States. I have worked in higher education for over 30 some odd years, and my work has always been around working with students from minoritized identities, and specifically working with Latino students in providing access, retention, and success in higher education. So I still continue to do the work. I work at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. My role is the Executive Director of Student Inclusion and Engagement. And so I do a lot of our diversity, equity, inclusion engagement at the university. That being said, when I went back to school to get my doctorate, I wanted to do something that was meaningful to me. If you're going to work on a dissertation, it's got to be a subject that you can stick to for a few years and be of interest. And the question of what is a Latina and how do I show up places and spaces as a Latina kept coming back to me. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do something, I really want to think about it. And how do I lead through that Latina lens, right? So my dissertation was on Latina and how do Latina around our cultural scripts or cultural values. How do we show up in places, bringing those values with us? That's what I wrote about. And that's the work that I do. I do continue to work with both high school students and college students to provide what I call for Latinos preparados y educados, because I think that education can open doors and change lives. And so at the heart of it, I guess I'm an educator.
Yeah. Amazing. I love what you talk about education, because I think especially in the immigrant community is the one thing that would be a differentiator. Maybe some people are lucky that they think that they don't need it and that they can carve their pathway through the world without having an education. But when you leave everything you know behind in your own hometown, education is one of those things that can really make a difference. And so that's something we advocate for as well. And usually we have a little more time in the podcast to dive deeper into the stories, but today is a little different. So I did want to ask one extra question about your own stories. And this is a question I heard on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and I thought actually was really cool. And so the question is, tell me something about yourself that people wouldn't find on your resume, that they wouldn't know about yourself from reading your resume. So start with Dr. Patricia, and then we'll go back in the order.
So you did share with us that you were going to ask us this question, and I was thinking, I don't have anything extraordinary. But the one thing I can think about is I make a really good tres leches cake. And I do not share my recipe with other people because if I did, then it wouldn't be so special anymore. So that is my signature. And I'm not a good cook. I'm a terrible, terrible cook. People never, I don't enjoy cooking. I enjoy eating. I love all kinds of Latino world food. So tres leches cake would be the one thing people are surprised when I bring it to anywhere. And I said, I'll bring the dessert. And I have yet to find someone that didn't like my tres leches cake. That's my little secret.
It's amazing. I lived in Southern Africa, and I had this family that hosted me for a month in their house, and I made a tres leches for them just to thank them. And then the next week, the lady comes back, the mom of the family, and she's like, "Can you make that cake for me? I want to take it to the office." So people in South Africa know what that is.
Yeah.
Dr. Alejandra?
I spend time in state sales. I love state sales. I think that's related to my love for nostalgic things. I love old photos. I love so many things. I love it. And I don't like to go preaching to antique stores. I like the state sales because I have to be in the house. I have to see how they live, their places and memories, all that they've had collected in our life. And for me, it's fascinating to be able to see all that was meaningful and that has to go somewhere else, right?
This is so random. I read online, probably I'd read a newsletter from the New York Times, and it was talking about estate sales and how somebody's making an app for people to now do these things online. So that people don't come into other people's houses.
Wow, I know the website.
She's the number one member.
You've been in the website.
Number one member.
It's still, well, I won't say that because I don't want to promote. I mean, something just for free, but yeah, I've been in the website. Oh yeah. I love all things.
That's amazing.
Your house does have beautiful things. I've been to the Alejandra's house. It does have beautiful things. I never knew the connection though, but now I do.
That's awesome. Dr. Patty?
So I shared my secret talent actually last weekend at a Lean and Latina conference that I keynoted at. And so I'll share it here. So my mother had a business for 17 years here in El Paso, and the name of the business was called Party Animals. And we were a children's entertainment company, despite all the phone calls we get asking us if we were an escort service. And it was like, no, we don't do escort. We are children entertainment. We can come to your children's birthday party. And so for about a year, people would call us and be like, so how much do you charge for? And we're like, no. And in those 17 years, well, actually in the first probably 5-6 years, I was a teenager. I got voluntold to work. So I would dress up as a Snow White and a Pocahontas and a Jasmine, all the princesses and everything else in between. And I would do birthday parties. So I would face paint. I would dance the hokey pokey. And I became a professional balloon artist. So my talent that is not on my resume is I'm a professional balloon artist. I can make animal balloons and all that stuff. So I shared this with the women at the Lean Latinas conference. And yeah, it's something that I could still do today. I can do like dogs and shooting stars and bears. And I know it's weird. Wow. But it definitely is part of my, what I learned watching my mother as a Latina grow her business and be relational and just be a chingona in what she did. And I had the privilege of being part of that. So I am a professional balloon artist.
Amazing.
And can I add something about Patty's secret talent that she doesn't talk a lot about? She's a mariachi singer. She can sing mariachi.
Long time ago. Long time ago, I was a mariachi singer. I was.
Oh my gosh! If we have some time, we're gonna have to have you sing a song.
Just give her a drink and then she'll do it.
Yeah. So.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
I love seeing the chemistry that you all have together, and it's really interesting because up to a couple of months ago, you all had your independent lines of work, right? Dr. Patty, you're an experienced industrial organization psychologist and the CEO and founder of the Bridgified Group. Dr. Alejandra, you are the CEO of Latina Power Coaching. And Dr. Patricia, you have 18 plus years of experience working at the University of St. Thomas as the Executive Director of Student Engagement and Inclusion now. That's your position now. So my question is, how do you all find each other and then got together to this new endeavor that you have launched in the last year or so?
Such a great question.
And I'll answer that. I think that El Puente Institute was meant to be. I think that it was written in the book. So it was just waiting for us to get together and make it happen. And I think it's also a testament of our Latino culture, right? How we look for deep connections, deep relationships. And I found that in these two amazing women. And honestly, it happened through LinkedIn. I mean, I met Dr. Patty through LinkedIn and she reached out and I discovered in her an amazing personality, integrity, passion. I'm like, oh, I would love to work with her at some point. I mean, and we just were chatting. And then I think Dr. Patty met Patricia and it was the same kind of thing. And then just this, and I keep saying this, I think it was meant to be that we were able to find each other at the right time, at the right moment with the same kind of mission, right? All in different ways. We had seen me through my coaching, right? I had seen clients, Latino clients over and over and over again struggle with a lot of things that were impeding their professional growth, right? And I was like, there's something here. There's a lot of commonalities that these women are experiencing that I'm helping them. And there's something here, right? Like we have to help them in a more structured way, right? And I think Dr. Pat and Dr. Patricia had some amazing things and we decided to just go ahead and put all our efforts, all our knowledge together. But I think it is a lot of like when you make those special connections, that doesn't happen very often, where you find very strong commonalities and passion that made us be here, right? I would love to hear from the other two co-founders.
When I met Alejandra and Patricia, there was an instant connection for me of awe of these amazing women doing amazing work, thinking in a very progressive, amazing way that our community needs. And so it was a no-brainer for me to say, hey, do you want to collaborate? Like, we can make something happen here. I reached out to Dr. Patricia because of her research, because of her dissertation. I was very much interested in all the work she had put into that. Dr. Alejandra has an amazing way of connecting with people on every level that I was just like, yes, let's hang out. It was just so instantaneous. And then the planning of how to do this all came together as we all started talking about what is really the mission of El Puente Institute and what is really what we want for the community, the Latino community, and how us three Latinas, and usually Latinas are not very good collaborators, although we say we are and we talk about being collaborators, sometimes it doesn't show up that way, which is okay because we are changing that script as we do things with like yourself and other Latinas, come together and really create something big with our own visions, with our own poder. And so that's how I knew that this could work out. And it has been a pleasure working with these women and being part of their life on a professional and now a personal level. And El Puente is definitely groundbreaking. It is definitely led by women, us, and it's definitely going to start making massive waves in the corporate world as well as in our community. We're really doing a lot of different work that's impacting just the mindset of the everyday Latino and Latina.
Right. Dr. Patricia, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just add that most of my life have navigated places and spaces that weren't created for me as a Latina in mostly predominantly white spaces. And one of the things that I've always been fortunate about is having allies or friends of people that are from other marginalized identities. I have a really good African-American friends, right? But always craving that. What does it mean to work with a Latina? What does it mean to professionally? I never had a professor in college, a supervisor. I've never seen myself in those spaces about me. And I'm now at a time in my life, a relationship that maybe I am that person. So I do remember getting that LinkedIn request from Patty and kind of just say, oh, why not? I think it was during a couple of years ago, actually, when we first started. And then I had followed Alejandra on LinkedIn because she's really good at telling her story on LinkedIn. And I knew who she was. And then we started talking, and it was about the coming together of like a con fuerza, like being together and saying, you know what, it's our time as Latinas now to come together as a voice. It's our time to find that power and find that voice and just create, somos poderosas. We're powerful, but we're more powerful when we're together. And so it was just that energy that keeps us going and keeps us motivated to just really be impactful and bring other Latinas along the way that we are, because I really believe the future is Latina.
Yep.
Unidas somos más.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And I just, listening to Dr. Patricia is like, I mentioned I grew up in Venezuela, so I always felt comfortable with the people around me. I was a nerd and a person that did sports, so I didn't really have a lot of free time. So I did spend time with the friends that welcomed me, right? That I only had little time to spend anyway. But when I lived in Swaziland in Eswatini for 2 years, although I loved seeing all these amazing people from all over the world and learning about their cultures, what was lacking was my culture, right? Like I didn't have any other Latinos around. And I was like, who do I dance salsa with? Who do I talk Spanish with? Like I don't have anybody. So when I went to pick a university I wanted to study at, I was very conscious to pick the University of Florida because I knew that I was going to have a lot of Latinos and that I was going to feel at home while still being able to explore other cultures, to explore what it was to, be at college in the U.S. And then when I moved to Texas A&M, I forgot that I had to consciously look for that. And let me tell you, that was a very interesting experience.
I'm so sorry. I'm so
Eventually
sorry.
I found them.
My husband is an ugly.
It was very, very peculiar, different culture for sure. But here we are. I found them. I found the Venezuelans and the Latinos, and those are the people that started the podcast with us. We reached out to our friends and say, hey, we want to create this community to help each other.
Exactly.
Come sit with me and talk to me. And those are the people there.
That's awesome.
So at Puente Institute, right? I want to learn a little bit more about what it is. And I especially want to talk about how everything that you do in El Puente Institute is evidence-based and is based on science, because there's a lot of people out there talking a lot of things. The internet is great to promote information, but not everybody is based on research. And so I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, El Puente Institute is about supporting organizations with effective Latino, Hispanic development strategies. And we do that through research, through organizational support, specialized leadership development initiatives, such as our Flagstaff program called Ascender. And so everything that we bring out to our clients is based off of some of research that's been done by other amazing Latino academics. And so we truly believe that there should be a bridge between the research and the practice, which is why El Puente Bridge is part of the name, but also a bridge between how we and our cultural identity shows up in workplaces and shows up in our leadership development and as leaders of our everyday work. So Dr. Alejandra always says that, we're in the business of making leaders, and we're in the business of making cultural relevant leaders that understand their identity and see it as a superpower versus something that's holding them back, or something that maybe someone in their work environment doesn't also see as a superpower. And so a lot of our teachings go from two perspectives. So we help Latinos themselves understand their what we call cultural drivers. And then we also help our non-Latino, our allies, understand the cultural scripts of the Latino community. And so being able to educate and bring awareness to both of the communities at the same time is really the superpower of El Puente Institute. So we're all about, let's teach our allies to learn more about us from that deeper cultural scripts level, our raíces, what we call. And then let's really empower the Latino community to see that everything within us is inclusivity. A lot of our drivers are about people, and that's the number one thing that drives productivity, engagement, and so forth in the workplace. So that's a little bit about how El Puente is different than other Latino associations and organizations and other leadership development programs.
Mm-hmm. If I can add something, I think the uniqueness of the way that we approach kind of goes back to all of us have doctor's degree, right? And one of the things that you learn as you're going to a doctoral program is you learn the value of data and research and validation. Did somebody already do it? And was it something written about? So data and research is currency that gets you at the table.
Yeah.
So we're doing the same thing. So when we're looking at how does our culture play, we are doing this to data-driven and information. Some of it is on past research, but we're continuing to conduct research. Where we have a survey that we partner with the Latina and Latinas so that we can get data and the knowledge from the today Latinas generation, Z generation Latinas to millennials. And then I have fortunate to be able to work at a university and be able to conduct surveys with our Z generation Latinos around what is different with this generation, because they're going to be 28 to 33% of the workforce. Z generation Latinos are. Many of them are third generation. They're not longer immigrants. They're children. 75 to 80% of them are children of immigrants. Alejandra is a perfect example when she talks about her son. So that when we're telling people what we know is based on knowledge that we have been able to research, because you get taught that through your doctoral program. You get taught that you just don't get to make stuff up and get to quote people or whatever. And that somehow stays with you. And the three of us intentionally, by joining together, sometimes we get too caught up in the weeds. But as you're seeing, a lot of PhD people are going into industry, and industry is valuing that. Is valuing that knowledge, it has been vetted, that we're just not coming up and saying things. And what people will self-author. Self-authorship is when you tell your story, which is a value to telling your story.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, we're giving you the data and the numbers and the research that's there to validate where we're coming up with these concepts. This is not something we made up. As Latinos, we could do more research about ourselves and our history, and we're getting that, right? More and more every day. But there's already a basis there that we're just now emphasizing, capitalizing on the base. I'm kind of like the research little, because of where I sit and the work that I do at the university.
Yeah.
But that's how we're enacting this.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. We are going to be the majority of the population in the United States. We're going to be the majority of the workforce because we are the ones having babies today. So that is really something that's very important. And when we talk about these things that either hold us back or help us in our careers, I also hope that we as doctors, we know the importance of research and of evidence-based practices. But I also really hope that people listening and buying, because a lot of people are buying the information, right? Like a lot of people are paying for master classes or coaching services, right? And I hope that we can stop and think about what is the product that we are paying for and where it comes from. Because I don't know that other people that don't immerse themselves in research understand how arduous the work is to first find it, to understand it, to make something meaningful out of the research, to then put it into practice. And I hope that people also understand that every information out there, it's great to learn from people's stories, but there is a body of research that's trying to explain the phenomena that we experience. And one of the things that I found unique when I learned about El Puente Institute is that, over the years, as I learned more about what is it to be a Latina in corporate America, I've been in it for 6 years now. I've heard a lot about how our culture can get in the way of our success. So, for example, like we've learned to be humble and to let our work speak for ourselves. But in corporate America, if you're not talking about your successes, nobody is going to talk about them. And so I've heard a lot about how it can get in the way. But what I haven't heard so much about is how our culture can also add value. And I think that perspective has been really refreshing from El Puente Institute. And I know that you talk a lot. I think Dr. Patty mentioned it, talk about our cultural drivers and how they can both hurt us sometimes, but also add a lot of value to ourselves and help us in our career. So let's spend a little time talking about at least the top 3 drivers that you have identified.
Yes, sure. Yeah. So when we talk about cultural drivers, we are, of course, we are basing this work in the understanding of culture, right? Of this culture that is not the part that is visible to everyone, what I call the fun, food, and flags, right? But is this culture under the surface, this deeply ingrained beliefs, roots that we have acquired in our families, that they are themselves within another cultural context, right? But there are these very deep messages that we've heard that would acquired in the early years of our development, right? And that become these shared understandings of the world, right? They're learned, they're acquired, they are these beliefs that are practiced by a lot of people, and that makes us part of the culture that we are, right? We have these several cultural scripts, narratives that have been identified of being characteristic of the Latino community. And we reinterpret them to be cultural drivers in the sense that they drive us to do something right. And in the sense that we might have to stop them if they might not be serving us in the right way at the right time, right? So that we call cultural drivers, that sense of motion. So when we talk about this, one of them is familismo, like you said. And familismo, it comes from this ideology, right, where family takes a very important role in our lives, right? It implies that we spend time with our family, that we are dedicated to our families, committed to our families, loyal to our families, right? That a lot of our decisions are done in consideration to our family responsibilities, that we talk about it with them, right? And is that we seek their advice. We are very connected to that nuclear. And sometimes it's not that small. It involves kind of different levels, right, of extended family. But for us, that importance given to that family is essential. You talk about how when you moved to the U.S., you went to Miami, right, to be connected to a certain group of Latinos or Latinas in there. When I came here to UT Austin, of course, I chose UT Austin. That's the only one that I applied because my family was 6 hours away by car, right? So it's very clear how that is still a very important aspect in our lives, right? And it, of course, related to the collectivism that is part of our culture as well, right? Where we all are dependent. We depend on this group and the group depends on us, right? So that is kind of like what familismo is. Now, if I can tell you that it helps us, and sometimes it's a great cultural driver. It pushes us to take care of others. It pushes us to be caring, to be inclusive, to invite people right into our family, to treat others with respect, with love, with kindness, right? So that's a way that we can take advantage of this familism because we know how to do that. We're used to that. We can leverage that power. And at some point, sometimes it makes us difficult to set our own boundaries. It makes us difficult to act or think about ourselves a little bit, right? We think about others before we think about ourselves. So sometimes there are certain characteristics of this cultural driver that we have to tame a little bit, to reduce, so we can continue to progress professionally speaking, right? So sometimes we have to be careful with boundaries, putting our oxygen mask first, taking care of ourselves, because, and once we are good with ourselves, we're going to be good with others, right? But sometimes we have to be thinking, how is this familismo serving me at this point, and how can I tame it a little bit if I have to?
It can be tough. I think, speaking from my own experience, for example, having been in the States for so long, I left Venezuela when I was 18. And it doesn't mean that my family was super important. In fact, I think I've only shared this one time, but when I was in Eswatini, I pretended that I didn't have a family, because if I did think that I had a family, I would cry a lot and I needed to adapt. And so I would pretend that, but I knew that my family was there. But that was how I coped with that time. But now being in the States for so long, being away, it's like, it's not that I don't care about my family, but I have had to sort of lower that connection a little bit or temper it a little bit, because otherwise the sadness takes over and then I can't really function like I need to function in order to meet the goals that I set for myself.
Yes, exactly. And we prioritize that family, which and the tricky thing is to be aware of our actions, reactions. And once you're aware, you're like, okay, that's why I'm acting this way. That's when I'm putting my family before my own needs. It's like, okay, it comes from something that I have acquired through all my life, right? As part of my culture. But once you have that awareness, you can say, okay, how can I reach that balance between my caring for others and what is important for me?
And I think you provided us with a great example of how these drivers show up differently for everybody. So with each person, each Latino's lived experience, past experience, whether they're first generation, second generation, majority population like me, or from the border towns, each of it shows up differently for each of us. So we empower people that come to our trainings, masterclasses, and sessions that it's important to look at how it looks for you as an individual, how it intersects with your other identities, and how you can either amplify it or just kind of hone it back. And so you've been able to use your superpower feminismo in the way that serves you so that you can be productive in this country. And like you said, not feel so sad that you're not like at hip with everybody, with your familia back at home, but it really serves everybody differently. And the first part of this whole process is awareness. What is feminismo? What are these drivers? What are their definitions? What are their characteristics? And then the next step is, how does it look like for me? And is it serving me in my current position, state, environment, workplace? So that you're using it as your superpower versus the one thing that's making you feel guilty. That's another thing that comes with a lot of these drivers. This isn't proven research. We don't have any research yet, but there's a lot of guilt that runs underneath of many of these drivers if we're not following the feminismo way of being, the collective group. If we're stepping out of that group and doing something different, there's guilt that comes with that. And so we're just empowering people to understand this is your story and to make it your own and feel proud of how you show up with your own cultural drivers.
I'll add one last thing though. So I'm really big about flipping the script and how does this become an asset for me instead of something that pulls me back? Mm-hmm. So the research that I conducted, and I did a lot of qualitative interviews with Latinas and talking about what does feminismo mean for me when I go to work as a leader, as a Latina. So what it tends to do is it helps us create really good inclusive teams because we like familial feeling places and spaces. So we want to go to work and create teams that feel like family. So in a world that's looking for inclusion and belonging is sort of the new thing. Like diversity is going to take care of itself as we multiply in numbers, right? And the equity, sometimes we may not have the power to provide that equity, right? But the inclusion and belonging is an action. And the belonging as a Latinas, if we are feminismo, it becomes really very normal for us to treat our teams like family. Great and a good day. The shadow side of that would be like maybe sometimes we have these professional boundaries that maybe we're expecting others to reciprocate that, and not everybody's going to feel the same way depending who's the other culture that you're working with. But there is a positivity and understanding, knowing I would tend to be a good inclusive leader because familial collective is part of my culture and the way that I behave and navigate. So therefore I might be good at that. So it's also, to me, it's also learning that I have this in me, in this culture. So that's the other side of feminismo that we could share to Latina.
Yeah, capitalize on.
Do you see why these two women are so amazing? This is why I work with these two women.
So then the next cultural driver that we wanted to touch on is Marianismo. So what is Marianismo and how does it reflect?
So Marianismo and machismo are the female-male gender cultural drivers that we uncovered in the research. And there has been a lot of research on both of these particular female-male drivers. And Marianismo specifically, especially the traditional Marianismo, is the traditional cultural and social expectations that women, Latinas, have. It's based off the influence of the Virgin Mary as the role model. And so are some of the traits that you'll see in Marianismo or traditional, what we call traditional Marianismo, is very submissiveness type behavior. We're self-sacrificing, so we'll put others before ourselves. We're very nurturing, as far as being able to be nurturing in a role of a leader or as a mother. And it's all around the concept of just being very giving of ourselves to whomever is around us. And so in the research that Dr. Patricia did during her dissertation, one of her participants kind of put it into this quote, "I tend to be more service-oriented and I'm willing to sacrifice." So this particular, Marianista way of being is about service and sacrifice. However, we found out in our research and in looking at Marianismo from a continuum perspective that there's different areas of Marianismo as we look at the younger generation of Latinas. So we've now been able to kind of categorize Marianismo into 3 areas. So there's traditional Marianismo, which is what I just described. Then we've seen Nuevo Marianismo. So this is kind of the evolution of the traditional role into a more modern type context where we're upholding our cultural values as Latinas, but we're also embracing our personal ambitions and we're being more self-expressive. So there's more strength and resilience that you see in a Nuevo Marianista. And then what we're seeing now in our new generation of Latinas is what's called embrismo. The true definition of embrismo is seen as an extreme feministic way of viewing the world. However, we like to kind of bring it back because it's not an extreme way of viewing Latinas. Embrismo is just more of the importance of valuing and celebrating one's femininity and female identity. And so we see embrismo as more of an opportunity to counterbalance those historical male-centric narratives that a traditional Marianista may, look up to. And it's more about elevating and balancing that woman identity. So embrismo is more bicultural in their identity. Latinas are more ambitious. They're more educated. And we're seeing this a lot in the younger generation of Latinas. And one quote that we've seen in the research that we've done from a younger Latina is that she stated, "Not all men are natural born leaders. Not all women are quiet, meek, and mild." And so we're seeing this transition in the Latinas' continuum of their identity. And so ultimately with the outcome of being empowered. And so just to quickly wrap up, we've encouraged Latinas to understand these 3 continuums, these 3 phases, because you can go from traditional Marianista to embrismo, to Nuevo Marianismo. We can actually move around. And that's the beauty of this new continuum is we're not stuck in one area. And so when I'm in front of a stage keynoting, I'm embrismo. I'm showcasing that part of my Latinidad as a Latina. And then sometimes when I'm around my family, I become a traditional Marianista, which is also a wonderful place to be. So there's there's a lot of great research we're uncovering around this concept and, really going deep into what it looked like for Latina leaders in today's workplace.
As I hear you talk about these things, right? One of the things that I saw a lot and I saw it as a juxtaposition was that, for example, my mom and my parents separated when I was really young. So I always saw my mom work. She went on high heels in her suits to the office. And for me, that was the example of my mom. My mom was a hardworking woman. She had, a corporate job, and she also took care of all of us in our house. We're 3 children that she had. And even though my dad was there, he wasn't absent. He was supportive, but he didn't have the biggest load in that relationship. It was my mom all the way. So I always saw my mom and Latina women as this very strong role models of women that went out there. But I also know that machismo existed and that we catered to that. And for me, there was always a juxtaposition of how can we be so strong women that take care of themselves, that go out there, that are single mothers and take everybody up. And at the same time, hold these machismo standards in our minds.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I think that this is the beauty about being a Latina, that we already naturally know how to maneuver and work around the people that are around us. So if we have to be traditional Marianistas and somewhat follow behind the man in whatever, at whatever capacity, we can do that. But yet we understand how to be, and excuse my language, chingonas when we need to be, and go to that embrismo as your mother exemplified to you, to be that strong Latina that takes care of what needs to be done. And so now we're not stuck at one place or having to be at one place. We can move as we see fit. We control now where we can go and how that shows up around whatever environment we're placed in or whomever we're servicing. Again, because we are service oriented. We can't take that. We're not going to be able to take that traditional Marianismo trait away from us. But how can we use it to empower us to know how to move from one place to the next? And so the machismo, side of the Marianismo is the second part, the kind of the opposite side of the coin that creates that partnership that has brought families from generation to generations together and has kept them together. So we do honor the machismo side, and Dr. Alejandra can go into machismo and talk about it, a little bit about it. But one thing I do want to point out with this new generation is that as we become more aware of gender identity and how individuals want to be identified as, the Marianismo, machismo roles are going to become mixed just as they are. We are seeing that machismo and Marianismo are important roles, but there's also a new role, especially those that want to be able to identify as they choose when it comes to the gender roles of Latinos. And so we like to also give agency and space for those conversations in today's day and age of what that gender identity looks like for those that want to make that own choice of gender identity. So I do want to bring that up because, it's no longer, yes, machismo marinismo is important, but there is now another set of identities, gender identities that we need to recognize in today's day and age.
I love that recognition, and I love the possibility of having the freedom of choosing, right? Because when you're talking about, nuevo marinismo, traditional marinismo, embrismo, it almost sounds like skills that we can flex at particular instances or particular spaces when we need it, which is we all have to do that no matter what. But it's great to now see it as something that you can use to your advantage that can help you be more strategic. And then also give the freedom of choosing with even for other people that their gender is fluid and have different identities, and recognize that they can be part of this and they can take these skills also to help them and choose how they want to do it. I think that there's a lot of beauty in that. So, Dr. Alejandra, do you want to tell us more about then what machismo is?
Yes, definitely. And machismo, Dr. Patty said, is kind of the other culture driver about gender roles in our culture and Latino culture. And it is the idea of the powerful man, right? The powerful figure that provides for a family, that protects the family, that protects and the people that he loves, right? So it's about that power figure, strength, right? Providing nature of the gender role that we have assigned to male figures in our culture. There are some things that are not good about machismo, right? There's a lot of problems that we have related to that, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of very difficult issues and topics, right? However, we try to understand that there are some good in it, right? Perhaps the idea of strength, of power, of decision making, of that ability to take care, of that ability to ensure that things are okay. So that's something that we can celebrate in men, right? But also being very careful and making sure that we all understand that, of course, any kind of violence or force against women is not appreciated and it's not validated, right? But we can take the good that we have with that. So in those terms, we also have been finding in the research that we can talk about caballerismo, right? The idea that men can support women the same way that women support men, right? That we are more on an equal space, on an equal level, that we can enjoy the support of men because we need it as women, right? So that tends to talk more about this caballerismo. And I think we see it a lot in these younger generations, right? When we can see men talking about being feminist, right? I'm sure you've seen the people with the t-shirts, right? And things like that. But we're talking about this new idea of how to be a strong male, right? Supporting women, supporting in a way that we understand both genders as equals.
And I want to just add to the caballerismo that we're seeing is the Latino men being active allies to their Latina counterpart. And so that's something we intentionally ask our Latino counterparts is, if you don't see a Latina at the table, it is your job as our ally to ask or a demand for a Latina to be at the table at your workplace or in any environment. So that's another characteristic and trait of the new Latino empowerment is those that are allies are emotionally connected, that understand that emotions are fine and they can be, expressed in public. And so just the awareness of the gender discrimination that happens in our society and that we do need allies as themselves to also, put us at the table when we're not there. So it's definitely a new evolved machismo. And that's why caballerismo is such a beautiful word for it.
I'm thinking about this gender roles and what we're talking about. And by the way, I didn't know Marianismo was kind of like the counterpart to machismo. That's news to me today. I don't see myself as a traditional Marianista, for example, right? I'm more maybe embrismo I identify more with. And some of my friends are also on the same boat. And we sometimes have these conversations with other Latino men who want to be caballeroso because that's part of the culture, right? Like they want to, let me get off my seat and give it to you. And I know that those were learnings from our crianza. And then sometimes we're like, well, thank you, but we don't need it. I can stand. But they're like, come on, take the seat. And then sometimes we take it as they just wanting to take care of ourselves, and we saying, I don't need you to take care of myself. And so sometimes it gets into these conversations of like, I'm just trying to be caballeroso, like, just let me be how I was supposed to be.
I think with the understanding of both of these identities and the intentionality of both of the identities and wanting to the male help and serve, protect, and then the female wanting to also be independent and serving, kind of help us say we're not against each other. Like, I'm not trying to not, like, they're probably thinking, I don't want you to think that I'm trying to overpower you or be your machismo. I just want to be caballeroso, like you said. And we can also kind of give grace to say, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And then also take it where there's not a competition, but there's just an mutual understanding of each other's roles and respect. That's the biggest part that I think the roles have been missing, where the allyship brings that respect in both roles of each other, and we're here to work together versus one of the other and so forth. Like, we're not fighting for that top position. We're just fighting to stand next to each other, really, is what we should be talking about when we talk with each other together.
And I think it's also important to note that we, with these drivers, we're also talking about perceptions and attitudes that are beyond surface behaviors, right? I mean, so we have these kind of behaviors that we are very used to, right? But we are also talking about attitudes and motivations that are under the surface, right? It's something very deeply ingrained about how we act. And sometimes it goes beyond the surface and in ways that we don't even notice, right? And sometimes we notice after the fact, after we have responded or after we have reacted in a certain way, or after we have even thought about something in a different way. So we have to keep that in mind, right? So there are certain behaviors that we can see that are very concrete, but a lot of these drivers work in ways that we don't even notice. That's what awareness is critical, right? To keep thinking about this, so we can be very aware of how we act and how we react, especially in the workplace.
Yeah. And I love this invitation of being good allies, right? It's just about allyship. It's about working together. And it's about understanding that even those dynamics can work to our favor if we flex them in the right way, in the way that it can benefit us. And so the next cultural driver that we wanted to touch on was simpatia. So tell me a little bit more about that and how it manifests.
So simpatia is very simple. Simpatia is connected to personalismo. And simpatia is what we call el baile de la simpatía. So it's the beginning interactions that you have with anybody in the community that starts very surface level. So, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo está tu mamá? ¿Cómo está tus papás? Like, it's very cordial, polite, very active. Our facial expressions become different when we're doing this baile de simpatía. We want to get to know something about you, and you get to know something about me, so we can create confianza, and that trust is built. Once that trust is built, then we move to personalismo, where that is about creating deeper, trustworthy relationships. It's like a different way of dancing, I guess. But simpatia and simpatia is all about how our community just interacts and is very cordial and polite and is about just creating community, really. So it's the start of creating community. That's why we like to call it a baile, because it's about being courteous and making others feel comfortable and valued. And there's a lot of inclusivity in simpatia that we automatically do. And so it helps to just really establish that strong initial rapport to now move to creating deep relationships. Yeah. So that's why we like to see it as a baile.
Yeah, it is definitely that dance that happens at the beginning when we meet somebody, right? That first interaction, or when we have interactions at a store, right? Like when we have interactions in a place, in public, or
It is that first way of being very gentle, very educados, what we have been told, right? The smiling, the asking about family, the being very polite, respectful. That is that simpatia, right? In our cultures, we all talk about it. It's muy simpático, right? We talk about that first interaction that we enjoy and we expect from our interaction. So many times when we do not find that simpatia in our workplace relationships or in our interactions in the world, we react, we resent that is not present, right? Because for us, it's like Dr. Patty says, baile is something that we do, is this kind of game that we play with others, right? And when we don't find it, or we see it not in the right way according to our values, we resent that it's not there. And that is the first step into the personalismo. We tend to develop these relationships, right? We believe in relationships. We appreciate long-term relationships, deep relationships. And one thing that I have found in me and in my clients is that we sometimes have these standards of how people interact to begin with, right? With empatia, and then how they develop friendships and relationships that are very different to the ways that another cultures do that, right? So it doesn't mean that friendships are not real in other cultures and very real in our cultures. It's just the ways that they are done, the way that they are expressed are different across cultures. And sometimes there is a shock, what is very well called a cultural shock, right? When you are in organizations that have different cultural values, I mean, you find that you don't know the hows or the know-how or the why or the when, because you are used to your own ways, right? Your own standards of interacting and developing friendships that do not correspond to what you're seeing in corporations, right?
Yeah. I can definitely think of experiences where I've been in a situation at work or joining a new job, and that the way that people build relationships is very different, or the way that people interact initially is very different. I've definitely been there. So do you have any advice for when we do expect something similar from other people, but we don't get it? Maybe because it's just, a different culture and that's not how they're used to do it. How can people navigate that?
I think that we talk a lot about when we talk about this and we do training, we talk about the need for two main things. Number one is to be aware that you have it, right? We go back to awareness. And that means that you have skills to relate to people, right? So you can use them. Make sure that you can use them, right? Don't be afraid. Don't hide them. Just make sure that you know your skills that you can put to use to interact with others. And number two is to develop your cultural awareness of other cultures, right? And don't take it personally. If we understand about our culture, that we have these drivers, these values, these ways of doing, that means that other cultures are going to have their own ways of being, doing, developing relationships. So try to learn about those, right? You can learn, you can read, try to learn about those, try to understand. You're like, okay, so they do it this way. That is different than our way. It doesn't mean that one way is better than the other. It just means that it's different and that I can understand. And then when needed, or maybe approach it that way, right? Or try to bring a little bit of mine, right? But just to not take it personally, right? I think it's a dance. And I think that as bicultural individuals, we as Latinos and Latinx individuals, we have access to two systems to make sense of the world that we can take advantage of, that we can leverage, right? So we have access to this. We can tell we have this flexibility and that adaptability that has made us be what we are now, right? Without that, we could not be here. So is a skill and it's good to use it and to develop it.
I just wanted to give one other insight about simpatia that can be traced back to the fusion and roots of the mestizo, right? Of the mixed race of indigenous African and European cultures in Latin America and how this got created. So the indigenous communities, they really held value of harmony and that communal well-being. Then when it fused with the African culture, it brought a focus of interpersonal warmth and empathy. And then with the final infusion of the European influence, added the element of politeness and social grace. So even in our own culture, we're seeing in these drivers that they also have a mestizo of the past that is now created, simpatia, for example, that is now showing up in today's community, which I think is a beautiful thing to go back to. How do we then approach, these kind of drivers when we're in other communities? Is to just be proud of your own cultural driver as Latinos and know that they're going to be different in other communities.
Oh, I love that. There's something good coming out of colonization.
Yes, there is. And that's a great, thank you for bringing that up, because we tend to focus and rightfully so, right, on the what was not right about colonization, and not to take anything away from that, the suffrage and oppressive state that occurred and still occurs. However, when looking at these drivers, we also have to give grace to the goodness of what it is and use that as our superpowers when someone is being discriminatory or throwing microaggressions at us, is to stand strong in the goodness of what our culture brings and you head forward with it, right? Delante pa delante with that on your shoulders.
Dr. Alejandra, then El Puente Institute focuses on the advancement of Latinx leaders, right? And then of understanding how we can develop our skills to be even better leaders in the corporate world. This upcoming Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month, the El Puente Institute is going to be running some programs to help us do that. Tell us more about what's in stock.
Yes, we are very excited. We're very happy that we are going to be celebrating Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month differently. We are having, of course, we are booking speaking engagements, keynote speaking, and workshops. But one thing that we're doing that is different is we are hosting a Latino Leadership Development Masterclass. It's a live series and takes place beginning September 14th. And it's going to be 5 live sessions with us for 5 weeks. So beginning September 14th. So we meet 5 times and we have 3 cohorts. We have a Tuesday noon cohort, Wednesday noon cohort, and a Wednesday evening. So we have options for all different types of schedules and times and availability. Right. And what we do in this masterclass, we provide this awareness of the cultural drivers and we linked it to our leadership performance, right? How are these cultural drivers impacting our leadership? What we do as leaders, what we decide as leaders, how we show up as leaders. So we are trying to bring the awareness of these drivers and how we can use those, right, for our leadership. When we can really take advantage of them. How can we leverage these drivers, our cultural powers, into what we do as leaders? So we are doing that and we are very, very happy to be able to provide that. We just finished our summer cohorts and people love it. And there's a lot of awareness, a lot of okay, now it makes sense. So we're very happy to do this again.
Yes, absolutely. And where can people find more information about the masterclass?
Well, we're going to have a link here with you, right?
Yep.
We invite everyone to follow El Puente Institute in LinkedIn. And El Puente Institute is part of the Bridgify group. So if you go to thebridgifygroup.com/El Puente Institute, you're going to find more about us. But we're going to put the link. We are very active in LinkedIn. Dr. Patricia Delgado, Dr. Patricia Conde-Brooks, and myself, we're always there. We work. So we are always a message away from anyone who wants to talk to us or have any more questions, or we are very available for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, Doctoras of El Puente Institute, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having us, Jenny. It's a pleasure, and have a fantastic Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram at LatinXcan or find us on LinkedIn as LatinX Can Podcast. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.